Hi there. I've been looking at these 6 books, and there's something emerging from this project, and also from life, I guess you could say, and something I've been really thinking about. There's a deep wisdom to quality, meaning the attitude that Pirsig is trying to describe by examples in his book. And when he describes certain people, these people with these, with this attitude, they have certain attributes, or they function in the world with certain attributes. So I've been very inspired by Rick Rubin's book lately, the Creative Act, and that book lays out internal psychological and spiritual scenarios which the artist is likely to encounter and ways to handle them to create quality work. It is definitely a book on cultivating wisdom as a way of being. As one aims towards wisdom, there are time-honored ways of doing it, but you have to look for them. You have to read ancient philosophy, and like I'm reading these 6 books. And again, I picked these 6 books because they're short. That's not the only reason I picked them. These are books that I really care about, but they're easy to read, and they don't make, sifting through all of Plato's dialogues is kind of a project, right? So these books are short enough that you could read all 6 of them in, a couple of weeks if you put your mind to it. And to remove the barriers to some of this stuff, I think might be useful. But again, you do have to look for these ways towards wisdom, because as Vervaeke says, wisdom training is no longer a thing as it was in ancient culture. We have STEM now. That's what we think is wisdom. And as Vervaeke says, lack of wisdom coexists with scientism and the meaning crisis, of course, isolation, and from what I'm noticing, a lot of really deep psychological distress and an inability to make sense of, and I know sense making is a big thing in this corner, make sense of what we're constantly seeing on the internet and otherwise, and other people's attitudes or other things that other people say. We don't know really where it's coming from, because so many people are influenced by what they see on the internet. So there's a lot less stuff that we're getting from actual experience. And that's a whole thing in itself. In my experience, people who kind of can function independently of all these influences have certain attributes, or people who are able to overcome psychological distress, or people who are able to stay calm in times when other people are not calm, people who have certain ways of being in the world, or even people who don't but have some ways that are working for them. Don't have everything, but sometimes they have these attributes and they tend to work for them and relieve psychological distress, clarify things, make it easier to get along with people, let's say. So there's some attributes that foster resilience, foster peace, foster meaning in life. And they fall into these categories so far. And this is a work in project, so maybe anyone who makes it up to this point can listen to the rest and maybe help me hone some of this stuff. So they fall into these categories: appropriate humility versus confidence. That's a dipole, let's say, concept, aspect, attribute. Humility when you need it, confidence when you need it. They're totally related. Adaptability, patience, the ability to pay attention, and the connection to something greater. But since these terms are very general and as such are kind of ambiguous when applying them to real life, I've come up with 15 attributes that I have found to be useful in people and myself for the release of pain, dukkha, and that happen to result in moral behavior and seem to be accompanied by the ability to find meaning. All right, so here are the 15 attributes. The first one is attention, and this needs to be the first one because the inability to focus in this age is kind of a sickness, right? That has befallen most of society. I've been listening to Cal Newport, who wrote the book on attention, deep focus, deep work it's called, and it's really worth getting a handle on what he has to say. And I'm not going to go into that. I just want to outline these right now without getting too specific. But being able to pay attention is our natural state, and therefore needs to be cultivated. Number 2 is curiosity. The spark of wisdom from the very moment we are born is that novelty that catches us or captures us unconsciously. And Pirsig would call this the quality event, or the cutting edge of all reality. And following it is actually easy since it's pre-intellectual, it just happens. Following it properly is where the wisdom is cultivated, meaning not being corrupted by stale, static value patterns or preconceptions. And curiosity is associated with adaptability. It's also associated with a higher, transcendence, let's say. The third is the balance of humility and confidence. Neither of these is a virtue on its own. It's a virtue in context. I heard a wonderful frame, and this is from Scott Adams, who's a polarizing figure. So whatever you think of him, please suspend that, because he's kind of a genius when it comes to understanding these things. He said, dialing the ego up and down as needed in the context. Sometimes it is truly in our best interest to dial our ego up and to be able to advocate for ourselves or for a principle or for our safety or for someone else. Humility is when we admit we don't know what we don't know, which also implies that useful criticism is good rather than a bad thing. If you can handle it, it's going to help you. And if humility is dialing the ego down, then the pain of criticism need not exist, right? So when you get constructive criticism, move your ego down so you can hear it versus be defensive against it. Number 4 is learning. And this, of course, riffs off of knowing what you don't know. And one of these attributes is the desire to keep learning rather than decide we already know. Number 5 is skepticism. If humility encourages us to learn, so confidence bolsters skepticism. Falsities can hurt you. And so skepticism is a form of protection of the ego. And this is when dialing the ego up makes sense. When you hear something that you don't think is right, when your intuition tells you, or rather, you verify what it is. You listen to it and you verify whether it's true or not. We all know what skepticism is, but I'm trying to explain how being able to be skeptical fits into this series of attributes. The 6th one is knowing your shadow. And we hear a lot of buzz about this term in pop psychology. It's all over the internet. It's all over TikTok. But the concept's really useful. It has to do with understanding attributes of yourself that maybe you don't like so much, and knowing that they actually exist, not trying to push them down. Because if you know they exist, and this is the whole Jungian thing, if you push something down, you're going to push down the good side of it. So if you think something about you is bad, because your parents told you it was bad, or whoever, and you suppress that, you're also going to suppress with it in the totality are two sides of it. So you're going to suppress down the side that is good. what Jordan Peterson, the example he gives, which is really good, is aggressiveness. If you push down your aggressiveness, then you aren't going to be able to advocate for yourself. And it's going to come out in weird ways like passive aggressiveness or victimhood or that kind of thing. So you really need to have access to the totality of your psyche. And that is what the shadow, understanding your shadow, is about. The seventh is patience. This is, of course, related to attention. And some people are naturally patient, but the rest of us must cultivate it. And this is an extremely important trait because it undergirds the entire attitude. You have to be able to sit with reality and not try to push it along in the direction you want it to be. You have to actually be able to be patient enough to see what's actually happening. 8 is clarity of communication, and this means you say what you mean, and you say what you mean clearly, which might take a little bit of work to formulate what that is. You know, the thing you say has to line up with what you're trying to say. Honesty is a key aspect of this, but so is tact. Communicating clearly has a certain implication that reflects that analog in your head. It is a type of analog making communication is, in the Pirsigian sense. And it also means that you don't, radical honesty, saying what you mean, despite who it will hurt, is dialing the ego up too much. So in clarity of communication, this means you communicate honestly and succinctly, but you do it in a way that's sincere and has compassion for the other person. Congruence of thought, speech, and action. This is based on Carl Rogers' congruence, meaning, and it's, of course, related to clarity of communication. Simply what you say, think, and do line up. And it's also perhaps the definition of integrity. Number 10 is the ability to take on perspectives. Can you imagine yourself in the place of someone else? Are you willing to suspend your own preferences and not be judgmental? And hear what the person is, the person's perspective is. Number 11 is the ability to find the right frame. So selecting or reframing context to illuminate truths, shifting lenses for clarity. It allows for understanding to emerge from ambiguity or from what Pirsig would call the moo state. You realize that the frame doesn't apply. You have to unask the question and find the right frame. He's got a whole section on this in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. 12, this is a huge one. This is where a lot of pain and suffering originate. That's comfort with uncertainty. There's no way to control any outcome, but with the wrong outcome typically comes pain, but what can come with it is a whole new set of possibilities. The definition of suffering is despite your best efforts, despite all your hard work and all the money you put into it, for example, and the sacrifice, the outcome may not be what you were trying to design it to be. Now, you can be heartbroken by this, or you can look at this situation for what quality thing can come out of it. So uncertainty doesn't mean bad. It means something that might guide you into a better reality, let's say. Number 13 is a metaphysical understanding of reality. You have to have a good metaphysics, or it's useful, let's say, to have a good metaphysics. You'll find these, Rick Rubin has his source. Pirsig, of course, metaphysics of quality that helps you understand how things work. The language of creation, of course, is a metaphysics, a different sort of metaphysics, but it's one nonetheless. And if you look at it, at the rudiments of the very beginning chapters of the language of creation, you're going to see, you see an actual metaphysics of reality. 14 is self-trust, something probably you have to learn. And 15, the final one, is, of course, accepting eternity and infinity. This is transcendence. All the above can only be grounded in material reality if this meta attribute isn't in place. You don't need to believe in God per se, but it helps. However, believe in transcendence will allow you to use these other attributes to handle reality as it actually is versus how you think it is in a narrow frame. So here are a summary of the 15 attributes: learning, skepticism, shadow, patience, clarity of communication, congruence, perspective taking, framing, comfort with uncertainty, a metaphysical understanding of reality, self-trust, and accepting the eternity, infinity, transcendence. It seems a little counterintuitive, I guess, that I'm not mentioning specific activities like be nice to other people, love your neighbor, or produce more than you consume. But those are too specific. You've got these very abstract principles that everything falls under. And then you have these very specific actions you can take. I'm trying to get kind of a rubric of these general traits and then how you could cultivate each of these traits. And I realize that these sound like platitudes and have been in various forms part of many self-help guides. Still, through this particular combination and my own understanding of and my own attempt to define them or get a handle on them and see how they can be cultivated, I'm trying to understand how to get the right attitude and what that attitude even is. So in the last chapter of On Quality by Robert Pirsig, it's called Attitude. And the attitude of the narrator changes when Robert and Phaedrus integrate, when they come together in this unity. Robert is the static part and Phaedrus is the dynamic part, and they come and work together to be a full father to Chris, disciplined enough to keep a job and not remove himself emotionally from his son, and fun enough to, say, risk a ride without helmets so they can actually talk on the motorcycle. They can actually hear each other. In this section, Pirsig describes a period of hopelessness and disillusion when he was in India. He was far from home, and he was studying Indian philosophy, and that was not giving him the answer he thought he'd get. So he walked around the town dazed and confused, and the locals, noticing that he was wandering around aimless, invited him into their homes for meals and just accepted how it was because they saw that's what he needed. And that attitude helped him recover. It was an attitude of acceptance that this man was in this state, and including him in their homes was just what you did. Ultimately, as Pirsig said, quality is the inverse of caring. When you care, what you do has quality. And caring can mean attending to, which has a lot of implications in this particular series of attributes I'm trying to pull together. And also appreciation and ultimately love. So I'm going to follow that vein and continue to try to tie this together. And any help from anyone watching or from this little corner would be much appreciated. So I hope that makes sense, and I'll see you next time.